Good. Awesome. Welcome everybody to this session called Your Digital Workplace Shopping List Must-Have Capabilities for Your Modern Intelligent Intranet by the amazing Sue Hanley. How are you doing, Sue?
I'm doing okay, Vlad. How about you?
I'm doing great. I'm super happy to have you part of Valo Fest. Before I give the stage to you, let me just do three quick housekeeping items. First of all, the session will be recorded, so if you find, and now if when you find this session amazing and life-changing, you will be able to share the link with your friends and colleagues, and we'll be sure to send everybody the links via email by the end of the week. And if you have any questions, you don't have the chance to talk, to have somebody like Sue present every day and a chance to ask questions. So please use this chance, either type them in the chat or use the Teams raise hand functionality, and we'll make sure that all of those questions will be answered by the end of the sessions. That's it for me. Sue, the stage is yours.
Thanks so much. So I really appreciate it. I really hope that people will ask questions. It lets me know that something I say resonates, and it's really hard, as we were saying earlier, when you don't have faces to look at. So please, please, please feel totally free to ask questions whenever you want. So let's begin with a sobering fact and why you should care about what's in your modern intelligent workplace or intranet. 90% of intranets fail to achieve their initial goals. And this is sad and scary. And what I want to do is explore how you can make sure that that doesn't happen in your organization. So the first thing I want to do is when I think about intranets, and I'm an information architect and a business analyst, and I spend a lot of my time designing and implementing intranets. And my first rule when I'm having conversations in organizations is don't talk about the intranet. Instead, think about the business. What are the big rocks for our organization? What are the problems we're trying to solve? What's important? How do we measure ourselves today? What's critical to the organization? Because at the end of the day, really well done intranets are going to solve an important business problem. They're going to drive business value, not just for each individual, and that's really important, but for the organization as a whole. So before you even think about anything, think about the business and what matters in your organization. And doing that actually helps you get funding, not just for the initial deployment, but for the next phase and the next phase and the next phase. Because when you're delivering value, your project becomes part of the main event as opposed to a sideshow. So it's always really important to understand, how am I driving value for the business? And you know, the big picture for all of this is it's way more than technology. So successful intranets and digital workplaces start with a clear vision, a vision for what we're going to do and how we're going to achieve it. There's also a plan for governance, and I'll talk a little more about that. Because honestly, if your content management plan is like the Roach Motel, where content checks in and it never checks out and it's not maintained, it's unlikely that your intranet's going to really deliver value. Governance is critically important, not just for your content, but for roles and responsibilities and who owns the intranet, who's responsible for maintaining it. You want to make sure that search works and that you've thought about how search is going to work in the organization. And most importantly, rather than just throwing up content at people, think about the tasks that they want to accomplish, and think about how your intranet and your digital workplace is going to help the people in your organization get work done, accomplish the tasks and actions that they need to accomplish from a business perspective and a task perspective. You want to think about what it's going to look like, but honestly, no one's coming back to your intranet because it looks good. They're coming back because it's useful and the content is valuable and it helps them get work done. Traditionally, intranets have been more about navigation, browsing, corp.com pushing news at us, and organization aligned to the org chart rather than the way people get work done. You have an opportunity with your modern intelligent intranet to think about providing experiences, not just content. Think about personalization and how you can make the intranet really all about me and all about every single one of us. And instead of thinking about just the org chart or aligning to the org chart, thinking about different roles that people play and building role or task-based portals and dashboards to help me get work done. So while the traditional intranet is about a collection of websites, modern intranets are really about providing a collection of experiences and services. If you really want a modern intelligent intranet, you should use this as an opportunity to clean up your digital garbage, which is really all about my next tip. Before you do anything, when you're thinking about what you need in your modern intelligent intranet, think about governance. And I call this approach governance first. Governance should really be about making the key decisions that you need to be successful in your digital environment. Thinking about governance first means you have the right conversations to make those key decisions. You want to think in SharePoint land about things like who can create sites, how will sites be provisioned? If I provision a site, what are the roles and responsibilities for people who own those sites? How are we going to mitigate risk and ensure that everyone in the organization has the training that they need? I got some very good advice years and years ago from a very, very wise client who told me that governance can be explained in 3 words: no sharp edges. So think about governance from the perspective of how are we going to make sure that we balance risk with opportunity and we effectively prevent people from making mistakes that are going to be costly to our information, but allow them the creativity and flexibility to manage and create the content and the solutions that they need. So, when you think about governance, you want to think about, like, remember when your toddler was really young and you had bumper guards on the coffee table so that they wouldn't bump their head as they were learning how to walk. Well, I think about that when I think about governance in SharePoint. We don't have to give everybody all the superpowers all at once until they actually know how to use them. Oftentimes, governance is about thinking through a series of decisions that you need to make when it comes to Microsoft 365. And people often say to me, well, Sue, if I knew what those questions or those decisions were, I'd be able to think about governance first as opposed to after the fact. And I've been thinking about this a lot for the last 15 years. And to help you with your journey and your decision-making journey, I've created a collection of questions or decisions that you need to make when you're implementing your modern intranet in Microsoft 365. And this link is where you can find the questions. So TinyCC requires capitalization in the right places, so you need to be very specific if you're following this link. But this link will take you to a document that is a PowerPoint document that you can use to guide the conversations about governance in more or less an order in how to think about it for Microsoft 365 as a whole, for Teams, for SharePoint, and Yammer and OneDrive, and Stream as well. So all of the elements of Microsoft 365 that are going to be in play when it comes to your intranet. The idea is to have the right conversations with these right questions and get the answers from a governance core team that should include IT and the business. What you do with those answers, the one thing you should not do with those answers is write a document. Because the problem with documents when it comes to governance is that no one's going to read them. What I would prefer is that you build a site. I'm going to call it a user resource center. You can call it a help site. You can call it a training site. You can call it a governance or a guidance site. But the idea is to take the answers to these questions and create the answers in a series of topic-focused pages so that the site is searchable and browsable and findable, no matter whether you've been told, oh, you're the owner of a site and now you want to know, oh, what are my responsibilities? Or you want to know how to upload a document and what are some good ideas for file naming conventions to make sure that you can find the content later on. So I have an entire presentation to tell you exactly what I think you should do with the answers to those questions, and you'll find that at SP.gov step by step. I could do a whole topic on that, and if we have time at the end, I'll demo what I think a really good site could look like. But the idea is with these two links, you should have everything you need to do something other than creating a document to create your governance, to implement your governance first framework. Tip number 4 is to think about the journey for your intranet and digital workplace as something that you're going to iterate. You really do want to think about a plan. And one of the things you're going to plan is your navigation. And you're going to basically think about that as a journey. You're going to think about navigation bottom up, because each unit of work is going to get a site in the New World Order, and you're going to want to think about it top down, because when you're planning the experience for your users, you're going to want to create an experience that effectively provides for them, let's call it a table of contents, to understand what's available in your intranet. And so you will likely, as you're planning, iterate through this concept. The most important input to the navigational plan for your intranet is to understand who your users are, what information they need, and how that information is applied in work. Notice how none of those things had anything to do with the org chart. And so you really want to think about how can we express that journey in a way that aligns to what people want to get done. There is a bunch of documentation actually in docs.microsoft.com that talks about how to plan the navigational journey for your modern intelligent intranet. And I happen to know that a lot of that intranet journey content has been updated in the last month because I did the updating. So if you Google or Bingle plan intranet navigation SharePoint, you should come up with the latest and greatest, literally updated in the last 3 or 4 weeks, guide to planning navigation. When I plan navigation for an intranet, I do it in a variety of ways. I like to do it in a mind map, but another really great way to do it is to just create an Excel document that anyone can edit. The most important thing is to express your navigation in a way that allows you to communicate what you're thinking to the stakeholders. So you really want to document something so that you can have a conversation. If it's not too complicated, I might actually build out the navigation in SharePoint directly so that we can experience what the mega menu might feel like on the SharePoint site. Most important thing to think about in your shopping cart for navigation is naming your navigational labels. Words matter when it comes to navigation. Every link that you put in your navigation, whether it's the intranet as a whole or any site that you create, is a promise to the reader. And when you label something, you need to make sure that that link takes me to content that matches the promise of that label. Here's a few guidelines to think about when you're planning those labels, but there's a great quote about navigational labels from an information architect named Jerry McGovern that basically said, if labels were married, they'd be getting divorced because they never keep their promises. So think about that as you're planning navigation. For example, I'll give you an example of a label I can't stand. Quick links. Like what? The other links are slow? Useful links. Are the rest of them not useful? Think about what when you label content, think about what it really means. Often, useful links and quick links are really meant to express things that the users need frequently. In other words, frequently needed, or maybe most popular, or something, or maybe another way to think about it, if you have a whole bunch of links, group them by topic rather than label like quick links, which is completely isn't going to help anybody actually, because quick isn't the outcome goal. We hope all of the links are quick. What we're really looking for is something that explains the context of what we're presenting on the internet. So labels are super important. And as I said, there is some great updated guidance. Now you actually don't even have to bingle it. This is what it looks like now, and it's a pretty long article because I have trouble trying to explain all this in a short amount of time. I teach an all-day workshop on information architecture, and what I've tried to do is express the highlights of it in this article. So as you're thinking about planning navigation, this is a really good resource for your modern intelligent intranet. I'm going to take a little breath here. Vlad, any questions?
Not so far, but if you want some feedback, I was laughing really hard when you said the slow links because I always use quick links. And yeah, that was guilty as charged.
Okay, so there you have a little homework.
I see some excitement about it was towards the beginning on how the intranet is designed, but only good feedback so far, no questions yet.
Okay. All right. I do need questions. That's how I know I'm resonating. So I just gave Vlad some homework. I hope I didn't create any consternation for you. But again, the important thing is when you're designing an intranet, you really have to think about the people for whom you are designing. And again, I know that you may want those links to be quick. We all want them to be quick, but it's really much more important that they guide me to getting work done. And so that's why we want to think about that when it comes to labels. All right, there is a feature. So in one of my side hustles, I am actually a judge on an intranet beauty pageant. We can't remember if we've announced the winners yet, but I am a judge on the Step 2 Digital Workplace Innovation Awards. And I've been doing this for 7 years. And it's really, really fun to do. And my favorite thing about being a judge is that I get to see intranets that people are really, really proud of. And I've been able to I don't want to use the steal or maybe recognize some of these really, really great ideas and apply them in my own work. And one thing that you will actually see in pretty much all intranets, whether they're winning awards or not, is they almost always have something like global navigation. And you may have figured out that we don't have that yet in Microsoft 365. At least we don't have it out of the box. We can 100% get it by writing custom code or using an intranet in a box, because almost all of them actually do provide global navigation, because we know that people really think that it's really important. In fact, I'm not saying I don't want it, because I was asked what my top feature request in the IA department was from Microsoft, and I said, number one, I want global navigation. But I'm just going to ask you to think about something, because the one thing I've learned in observing people using intranets over the years is that typically when one of your users goes to your intranet, they're going with a task in mind. I need to complete an action. I need to fill out an expense report. I need to update my benefits. In other words, they've got something that they want to do, and they want to be able to find that, or maybe they want to find a piece of information that they know is on the intranet. Typically, that journey is I have a task in mind, I go to the intranet, I search or I browse for that content, and then I do something with it. I either read or download or fill out a form. But the bottom line is I am taking an action based on a task that I have to accomplish. What I'm not doing is saying, oh, now that I did that task, let me go see what other kind of tasks I can accomplish, because I actually came with that mission in mind. I'm going to use that information that I gathered from the internet in my daily work. I am not often bopping around, that's a technical term, across the entire intranet looking for my next possible activity. So when you think about that as the journey experience for most users, now you wonder, well, what am I getting with global navigation? Because what global navigation helps me do is go from context to unrelated context, because that's, when you're on a site that is all about, like, for example, HR, any HR related task should be very, very easy to accomplish from that location. And if it's not, you have some information architecture work that you need to do in that context. But am I really going from HR to finance on a regular basis? Probably not. But we still would like the ability to do that, even if we have to travel someplace else to do it. So while we're waiting for Microsoft to deliver on my wish list, which is global navigation, what about thinking about a navigator site? So the best place, I think, to build that navigator site is on the home site, which is now available in a tenant near you. So think about having a site, ideally the landing page for your intranet, in which you host global navigation. That's where you provide effectively the table of contents for your intranet. My best advice here is that it's on the home site, which means it's easily accessible from the start page and from the mobile app, but you could also take the logo, the placeholder for a logo in the suite bar and wire up the home site to that logo. And if you do that, you are actually always one click away from global navigation. And so it's a way to get global navigation before we even have global navigation. So hopefully that makes sense. But I still want it. So if anyone from Microsoft is listening, still want global navigation. But I have something I can do while I'm waiting. The other thing to think about in your shopping cart is to think about how you're going to connect families of sites that are related to one another. Now, we all know at this point that we are not using the S word in our modern intranets. Subsites. We don't even talk about it. We're not going to do that. The world is flat in the land of modern. But we may not be able to know at the very beginning of our design all of the hubs that we need in our intranet. So I want you to think about sort of what should our hubification model be as we're crafting the design for our modern intranet. I think there's really only 3 possible options for what will be a hub. One is something aligning to a function or an organization like HR. Another is geographic. And the third is a portfolio. So imagine a collection of projects for a specific client, or a collection of projects that are all related to one another, and we have them hang together in a hub. Today, when we associate to a hub, nothing changes about our permissions, but we become part of a family. Soon, we're going to be able to connect hubs to other hubs to create a broader scope for search and a more convenient architecture for connecting families. And we're also going to be able to do a very cool feature, which is to be able to say, anytime you join to a hub, allow that hub to add some reader permissions to your site if you want. You don't have to take the reader permissions, but we can set up a read group at the hub level to make sure that if a site associates to the hub, that it actually can be read by people who already have access to the hub itself. Remember that if you're planning your intranet, it is not required that every site in the intranet belong to a hub. It's also not required that you have more than one hub. A lot of small organizations start with one hub and then eventually grow to more. But hubs are a little bit like potato chips. You kind of can't have just one. One is kind of the loneliest number in hubs, but you can absolutely start that way. So as I said, there's kind of 3 models for planning hubs. And if you want some more information about how to think about planning your hub family, here is a link to the article on docs.microsoft.com that talks about hub site planning. I'm going to take a breath because oftentimes people have questions about hubs.
I was waiting for that signal. Question.
Yes.
I know global navigation doesn't solve all problems, but I don't feel comfortable with the modern hub sites approach. How can I shift my thinking to make hub sites work?
I'm not quite sure what you're asking there, because global navigation and hubs are really 2 different things. And in my world, like this is the utopian world of Sue Hanley, we need more than one hub, because if you look at my model for HR, you're going to think about your organization. You're going to need something like this. Even the tiniest of organizations has an HR model that looks a little bit like this, which means HR alone is going to have 5 or 6 sites that belong to the HR family. So I think HR is almost always going to need its own hub meaning when I land on the HR main hub, I need that search scope to find content that is just about HR. And I think it's a very convenient way to think about that. So I typically start by thinking about hubs from a functional perspective, but I also want to take a pivot and look at hubs from a regional or location perspective, because sometimes having an entry point for a country, like in this example of Austria, is also a relevant user experience. Global navigation for me sits on top of that whole thing. And it may not be that every site is or every hub is represented in your global navigation. What you're trying to do with global navigation is essentially introduce your readers or your visitors to the general concept of what is available in the intranet. And you're guiding them with your meaningful labels and your very well-structured information architecture to take a journey that will get them to the site that they need based on good labeling and good architecture. So we do not have to live with the myth of I need to be able to find everything on the internet in 2 or 3 clicks. There's no data to support that. So if you've heard that myth, take it out of your head, because there's nothing that says that has to work. However, the journey that one takes in navigation has to resonate and get you to the content you need as quickly as possible. So the goal isn't minimizing clicks, it's minimizing time and maximizing the efficiency of labels by testing them to make sure that they resonate with people. So think of global navigation as the big story, and then hub navigation more as the little story. So maybe a table of contents within a chapter as opposed to the table of contents for the entire book. Does that help?
I'll let Simon confirm if that helps. But meanwhile, let me ask you another question from Todd. Yeah. Once we have associated hubs, do those 3 models still apply? Because some users want special purpose linked sites that don't exactly fit those.
Okay, so here's what I'm going to say about associated hubs, which we don't have yet. This is still going to be, you're going to have a lot of trouble convincing me that there are any other than these 3 basic models for creating a hubs. Associated hubs are about creating families of hubs. So I could imagine that, trying to think about, okay, so think about organizations where I'm thinking of one that I work in where global finance happens to own, if you will, IT, and a few other topics, a few other organizations that have nothing to do with finance. Because I don't see finance and IT in my head as really belonging together. One of the things that an associated hub would allow us to do is have a hub for finance and a hub for IT and connect them so that if I go to the finance hub, which is, again, it's an org model, which intranet architects don't necessarily like your architecture to be just the org chart, but sometimes you have to deal with it. Sometimes politics drives. If I go to global finance, what associated hubs will allow me to create a search that will encompass all of the associated hubs. So like a hub of hubs. So that's one way of thinking about using associated hubs. But at the core, each hub, you're going to have to fight me on whether or not these 3 models are still going to be the same 3 models.
That's it for questions for now, and I would never fight you, Sue. I know you'd win.
You can. Here's the thing. I don't have associated hubs in my tenant. I have hub read permissions. I got a special that I have. So I know how that works intimately. I've explored how associated hubs are supposed to work, but I reserve the right to change my mind. Now, I don't think I'm going to change my mind about this, but I reserve the right to come back with different guidance once I've had a chance to really see all the nuances, because there are some nuances with hub read permissions that I would never have even thought of until I started using them. So, all right, so moving on. Again, I'm an information architect. I will tell you, you guys might not like it, but boy, I love metadata. So metadata is really important to think about. It's especially important to think about because of what's coming later this summer, Project Cortex. So enterprise, when you are planning your modern intranet, you really should be thinking about what kind of enterprise-wide metadata will help my users both not have to remember specific values and will help me organize my content in a way to make it more findable. So for example, you could imagine that you wouldn't want everyone in the organization to maintain a list of all the business units or all the countries in which you operate or all the products that you make. Those kind of entities make really good term sets. And thinking about how you might both create those terms and then propagate those terms really is part of the planning that you want to think about for your modern intranet. A big decision that you're going to want to make is how you, if and how you want to leverage consistent content types across sites. We could do an entire slideshow about this, an entire presentation about the best way to manage shared content types. I will tell you that you can build a really, really effective intranet without enterprise content types. It is not mandatory to have them, but having content types that you share across the intranet will enable you to unlock some scenarios that you're going to make some decisions about. So the scenario that I think is the one that I think about the most is how are we going to manage policies and finding policies in the intranet. I actually prefer a policy center, one either hub or one site in which all policies live. In that instance, I do not need, I still need a policy content type, but I don't have to put it in a hub, in a content type hub. I can put it just on the Policy Center site. But that doesn't work in every organization where they want to distribute policies across the intranet. If you do want to distribute a document like a policy and also want a roll-up experience, you're going to want everyone in the organization saving policies with the same content type. I'm not sure that's very easy to do, but if you are going to try and do that, you're going to definitely want an enterprise level content type. If you choose to use any type of shared metadata, I want you to think about the following things. Training. Make sure that people understand what that is and how to use them. I really want you to think about training. And did I remind you that you need to think about training, and site owners are going to need training. So I don't know how many other ways I can say that, but the most important thing to think about when you use enterprise metadata is to make sure that you are not forgetting that in a distributed model where lots of different people are going to own the responsibilities for managing sites, they're going to need to know how to use that superpower. So critically important. There used to be a TV show in the US years ago called The Greatest American Hero. And I loved the show. In fact, the star of the show, on the show, his name in season 1, his name was Mr. Hinckley. And then after President Reagan got shot, they changed the name in season 2. So his name became Mr. Hanley. So my kids loved this show. So the basic premise of the show was that there was a regular old teacher, and he was wandering around one day and he came across a clothing box, and he opens it up, and inside is a super suit. No manual, but a super suit. So he puts it on, and he's got the cape, and now he can fly. But because he didn't have any training and he had no instructions, he was flying into walls and into trees and constantly not knowing how to use his superpowers. When it comes to empowering and enabling site owners, I don't want to assume that anything is intuitive, or that people who are not doing IT on a daily basis, that they're going to know how to use these things. So training is a really important concept to think about for your modern intranet. Another thing to think about is search. I mean, very often we assume that search is just going to work and it'll be just perfect. I think we really need to understand, as part of all of the work stream in our intranet planning, what are the key things that people really need to do? What are those key search scenarios that we should think about enabling for our modern intranet? And there are a lot of different ways to think about search, and there are some really cool and easy things we can do out of the box. And then there are things that we can sort of go on a customization journey. So there are some experiences in search that can be instantly valuable that we often forget when it comes to intranet. And one of them is to make sure that when we create a new site that we want to promote, to create a bookmark for it. So to make sure that, like, for example, a key term for your organization might be travel. Maybe not now, but maybe it used to be. So a key term might be travel. We'd like, when someone searches for travel, for the global travel site to come up first in search results. That's what bookmarks enable you to do in Microsoft Search. Search can also be configured. I'm asked all the time, like, can we have refiners in search? Well, the modern search experience doesn't have them natively, but there are some configurable P&P solutions that you can use to create a search experience that leverages all the metadata you planned in that previous task. And at the end of the day, you can go all the way into sort of developing and customizing your own search experience. But I always like to start small and see whether or not we can use the native capabilities in search to drive the outcomes that we're trying to in our organization. I mentioned this earlier. I don't know if you guys can hear, but there's a massive thunderstorm going on right now in Bethesda, Maryland, where I live. So if you hear rain, it's the rain on the roof of my office. So one of the things that's been rolled out now everywhere, I believe, is the new home site for intranets. And the home site is just an enormously cool capability. And what it allows you to do is to create effectively a landing site for your intranet experience. My friend James Robertson came up with 7 important roles of the intranet homepage, and I'd like to add an 8th one when it comes to a modern intranet. And I think all of these are really important, but the one really important capability for modern intranets is to make sure that in addition to doing all these really great things with news and navigation and information that I need organizationally, the other thing I want to see is information that is really all about me, both targeted to me and what is important to me. So that, I think, makes a classic intranet is information thrown at me, but a modern intranet also recognizes who I am and provides information that is tailored and targeted to me. We want the homepage of the home site to look really good, but the most important thing is that that site in particular, which is going to get a lot of visibility, should drive business value. And I want you to think carefully every time you're creating an intranet site, looking at the piece of content that you want to add, making sure that it relates to a user outcome that you defined when you were thinking about planning that site or even that home site. Who are we building the site for, and what do they want to do or learn or know? And every single web part or link that you add to that site, I don't think you need to say, oh, does this spark joy? But I do think you need to apply that Marie Kondo principle and say, does this element that I'm about to add to this page, does it add value? And is this the appropriate place to put it? Because honestly, no matter how gorgeous and beautiful your home site is, people aren't coming back to your intranet because it looks good, and they're certainly not coming back with a box of popcorn to watch that rotating news banner a million times. They're coming back because it helps them get work done, and it's adding business value. One of my favorite features of the home site, and by the way, you can do this pretty much on any site, but one thing that you can do on the home site to create that all about me experience is to leverage the vertical column to create your me content and use the columns to the left of the vertical column for your us content. So think of the home page of the intranet as being a combination of us and me. And I often hear intranet owners complaining that people like go to the homepage and they immediately go off. It's probably because your news isn't all that interesting, but also it's because there's not a lot of useful information on the homepage, things that I need on a regular basis. So think about how you can use, there are quite a few web parts, straight out of the box web part, that you can use today that have the ability to recognize who the logged in user is and target content to them. The other thing, of course, you can do is that pages, and that means news and regular pages, can also be targeted to one or more audiences. And there are two magical web parts that recognize audiences. One is news and the other is highlighted content. So you can create some really interesting personalized experiences with things, the assets that you have today in modern SharePoint. The home site itself has some really nice superpowers. The example site, which will be what you'll get in the future when you get a new Microsoft 365 tenant, it's got really lovely design, but you can copy that design onto any site. It is designated as an organizational news site by default. That means that every news article that you publish to the home site gets that extra special banner on that article. And so if I find the article on the start page, or if I find the article in the SharePoint mobile app, I'll know that this came from the home site. But you enable the organizational news with PowerShell, and you can do that to any site. So it's great that the home site gets it by default, but you can enable that particular superpower on any site that you want to deem organizational news worthy. The other feature I think that is really terrific that you can, again, also do on any site, but it may not make sense on every site, is that search by default when you're on the home site is scoped to the entire tenant. So remember that search has sort of three experiences in SharePoint: tenant, hub, and individual site. And by default, when you're on most sites, search is just scoped to the site that you're on. When you're on the hub, the main site for the hub, search looks across all the sites associated to the hub. When you're on the home site, however, search expands and it looks at the entire tenant. So there was a feature in the SharePoint in the home site that we lost, but hopefully we'll get back. And that is that the home site used to carry its theme and navigation to the SharePoint start page. Unfortunately, that got deprecated when the SharePoint start page reverted to the legacy version of the SharePoint start page. But I'm really hoping that that comes back, because that was another really nice feature of the home site, is to give you yet another place to find that consistent global-ish navigation. The other feature that is actually unique to the home page is the special affordance in the mobile app. When you enable a home site, you get a little home icon in the mobile app, and that is linked automatically to the SharePoint home site. So it creates a really nice experience on the mobile site. The other thing that the home site enables you to do is to support those key roles that we talked about a couple of slides ago. So it is a really important capability, whether you enable it as a home site or not. Your intranet needs a landing page, so you may as well take advantage of that new sort of superpower-enabled communication site. And take a teeny break. Any questions, Vlad?
Yes, we have a question from, I don't know if you know him, Chief Troublemaker Daniel Glenn.
Oh, God. Yeah.
Yeah, so get ready.
Right.
So should you provide any kind of training when implementing shared metadata?
Didn't I say that about 4 times? Yes. Daniel, do you disagree? He was kidding. Hey. That's
Hey, he called me out for not asking the question, so I had to.
All right. So in typical sarcasm mode, don't let friends participate in your sessions. That's all I'm telling you. Ban anyone who is going to
Fine, I'm
yank your chain. All right. All right, so speaking of Daniel's topic, let's talk a little bit about training. You know, at every project I'm ever on, the part of the budget that gets cut first, more than anything else, is training. So what I want to make sure is that when we're implementing intranets, that we make it super easy for people to do the right thing. And I want to make sure that if at all possible, we we make it so that you don't need training. And one way to do that, to make it so that you don't, or you need less training, is to do things like create page templates in all of our sites, so that when I create a new page, the template for the page has all the training for how to make a good page built right in. The 3 Microsoft templates actually do that, but I don't like any of them as themselves. I actually would prefer to make one that is custom for my site, but follows the same really awesome pattern in those templates, which is they have a whole collection of different web parts and sections. And in each one, they basically tell you how to use that section and provide links to more information on how to use the particular feature or web part that they're all about. And I think that's something we can do too. The other thing we can do is, if you are going to have a self-service site provisioning, or if you're even going to provision with a script, you can actually build into the template sites that you create for people links to your training content. So site designs will help you have more consistency in your intranet sites. And if those default designs also link to training content, you have a nice chance at getting that information to the right people at the right time, just when they need it. I use that governance site, the user resource center site that I talked about in the governance tip. I use that also to host content to help site owners be more effective in creating really good content for their users. So rather than just telling them how to create a page, I'm going to have a page, some guidance in that site that will tell them how to write really well for the intranet, how to create a page that gets read, not just how to create a page, how to use sections and what section layouts work the best based on the problem that you're trying to solve on the page. So I think it's really important to give people training. And I call this project, I had an opportunity in the last 2 months, because I wasn't doing as much traveling as I normally do, to work on a project for Microsoft. And one of the things that I did was update a lot of intranet guidance documentation on docs.microsoft.com. So there is a brand new document called Plan Your SharePoint Communications Site. The link is here. It's super long, but you could also find it by searching on docs.microsoft.com. Things that you can provide for your site owners to help them really think about who's using my site and how can I plan that site to work more effectively for all of my readers. I think you want to think about training as something that you try not to, you don't want to overwhelm people. And of course, the best time to offer training is right when someone's ready to use that skill. And I think there are things that everybody sort of needs to have a basic understanding about when it comes to Microsoft 365. These are kind of the basic digital literacy skills that we found during the pandemic, that a lot of people who are now leaving the office and having to work from home may not have had all of these skills in every organization. Not every member of the team that was now working from home really knew how to search effectively, really good practices for OneDrive, and how to work effectively in teams. So I think we have a good opportunity as we're thinking about our digital workplaces of the future to incorporate what kind of training does everyone need, and then maybe what kind of training do certain people need based on their role in relation to the site or the intranet as a whole. So as I said, every year I get to put on my judging robes and look at some amazingly cool intranets and digital workplaces. And there's a few sort of common things that I've noticed in all of these award-winning intranets over the years. I mean, they tend to have some really good capabilities for finding people, finding information about activities that people do all the time, like travel. They are highly personalized. Some of the more engaging and interesting ones that I've seen have opportunities to engage with leaders in a lot of different ways. I have a client that does something really fun, and that they create a page in a site that they call New Kids on the Block, that they surface on their homepage every time a new employee is added to the organization. And I will say that one thing, so from a content perspective, this is something that, these are some of the more interesting things I see on intranets. But from an overall perspective, one of the common themes that I see in award-winning intranets is that they provide templates and guidance and best practices and training for people who are creating content and for people who are creating sites. And so leaving training out of the picture is always a recipe for having an intranet that is not as effective as it possibly could be. One of my favorite things to look at when people are submitting their intranets are some of the videos that these organizations have created to celebrate either the launch or the relaunch of a feature or the intranet as a whole. Lots of really cool ideas. And you know, the challenge with coming up with a video, by the way, it's the concept that's hard. Creating it, you can probably do with an iPhone and a few, maybe not even costumes, but it's, you know, what is the creative concept? So Ellen Van Aken has created a list where she's got links to all kinds of intranet launch and relaunch and promotion videos. And there are a gazillion ideas that you can potentially steal from, that she's curated for you. So I highly recommend taking a look at that list. I think there's a couple really fun ones that I would definitely recommend, and I've highlighted them here. I'm not going to click on them and show you them, but really, really cute and very creative. And what you'll notice in some of these videos is some of them are very, very high production value and probably cost a lot of money to create. And some of the most clever and creative ones are clearly shot by non-professionals, but they're adorable and really fun, and definitely worth taking a look at to be inspired for something that might work for you. So video is a great way to communicate. It's something that we're all familiar with, but there's other kinds of activities that you can do at your launch and beyond. The Who is Only 2 Degrees from Kevin Bacon. This is an oldie but a goodie. It's one of my favorite launch activities I've ever seen. And this was done at Penn State, where they actually put posters all over their campus with these kinds of questions. And the goal was actually to go to the intranet to try and figure out from the profile who are the people that had all of these creative backgrounds. So really fun things that you can do. I've seen intranet scavenger hunts where you give people a set of tasks and ask them to do it. And at some point in that journey, there's a little secret link that you can click on to enter a contest. I've always thought that like sort of professional executives would never do those things. And we once did a scavenger hunt in an investment banking firm. And it's amazing what millionaires will do for a $50 gift card. That's all I'm saying. So anything that you can do to engage just makes the whole launch and everything more fun. And one thing to remember about your intranet is that you are actually never done. And so you do want to think about, how am I going to make sure that I am not only going to adapt to change in the organization, but changes in Microsoft 365. Just this week, I noticed a little feature that had not been there before, which is that the Yammer Conversations web part now lets me select only 2 items instead of 4 or 8, and I'm or 6 and 8, and I'm super excited about that because that web part took up a lot of real estate on pages, so I'm really glad I can just show 2 items. Things in Microsoft 365 change all the time. You're going to need a village of people to keep track of everything, and one really effective way to extend your village is to build a champions program inside your organization. Lots of guidance in the tech community about how to do that. And there's even a community that you can join, super effective way to make sure that you are building champions in your own organization. And just to wrap it all up, the shopping list for your intranet does not have to include toilet paper, although it is something that we're all still trying to look for. But I want you to think about these things. Don't think about the intranet, think about the business, think about governance. You're going to want to iterate. So think about top down, bottom up, maybe a navigator site until we have global nav. Think about your hubs. Think about enterprise metadata. Don't leave search. Don't make it the little redheaded stepchild of your intranet. Plan your home site. Don't forget training. Celebrate your launch, celebrate your successes, create sites and content that people want to use, and don't forget that you're never going to be done. And I think if you follow all of these tips, you'll find that 100% of your intranet meets or exceeds expectations. And that's what we're all going for. So all different kinds of ways to connect with me. But that's what I had to talk about. And Vlad, I think we have like 5 minutes for questions if there's any more.
No questions. I've asked all of them. There's another one by Daniel, but it's more of a joke, so I'm not going to ask it. But if there's any other questions, now is the time. But so far, the chat is full of compliments on your amazing session.
Thank you so much. It was really great to be here.
Awesome. Let me stop the recording and